What was the prime factor behind the British ruling most of the world at one time? And how did they become so strong and greedy? So, as always, when an event happens in history, there is a lot of context and causal, and there's a causal chain behind it. And that causal chain can go back centuries. So, let's go back to the root of how this all began. So, in the 14th and 15th centuries, the English were a middling small kingdom in Europe. It was not a powerful kingdom at all. The British were a small middling kingdom. And in the beginning of the 15th century, you had this great, not great, but very famous king, Henry VIII. So Henry VIII was a king of the Tudor dynasty. He was well known for marrying many wives and executing most of them eventually. And he had delusions of grandeur. He saw himself as one of the great statesmen and conquerors of the world. And he also was had this tendency to fall in love very often. So he was initially married to Catherine of Aragon, who was a Spanish princess. He had a child with her, a daughter named Mary, and he wanted a son naturally. And Catherine, for whatever reason, was unable to bear a male child for him. And so Henry VIII fell in love with a noble woman named Anne Boleyn, and he wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon and marry Anne Boleyn. Now, in those days, I mean, you would imagine a king who could just marry whoever he wanted, but no. In Europe, the supreme power rested with Rome, the Catholic Church, the Vatican. And the Pope was the supreme authority in the whole of Europe, who decided what kings could and could not do. So Henry VIII had to request the Pope to grant him an annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon and allow him to marry Anne Boleyn, and the Pope refused. So that's the power the Pope had. That's the power the Vatican had. They were actually the supreme power in Europe. They had more power than any king, any emperor in Europe. So the Pope refused to grant Henry the annulment of his marriage. So what Henry did was he refuted the authority of the Vatican Church. He embraced Protestantism, and he created a new church in England, the supreme authority of all Christians in England, the Anglican Church. So he broke off from the Vatican. He changed his faith. Basically, he made the whole of England Protestant. He started his own church, the Anglican Church. The Archbishop of Canterbury is the supreme head of this church, and he had the marriage to Catherine of Aragon annulled, and he married Anne Boleyn. So this essentially ended the hegemony of the Catholic Church in England. Now, it had long-term effects on England. The Catholic Church had imposed the so-called Dark Ages on Europe. No new ideas were allowed. No science was allowed. Science and anything which was not written in the canonical texts of the church, anything that was not in this text was basically termed as Satanism, and it was punishable by death. So this is the hegemony that ended in England. And after Henry died, his daughter Mary tried to revoke what Henry did. She tried to bring Catholicism back, but she died in a very short period of time. And her sister Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, she is the one who restored her father's reforms. Yeah, and she made England a strong Anglican country, a Protestant country, and her age is called the Elizabethan age. It is the age when new ideas came into England. It's the age when new money started coming into England from India, right? So this is the time when great changes started to happen in England. So new ideas were afforded. People were no longer discouraged from thinking differently. Science was allowed. Mathematics was allowed. Indian sciences and mathematics made their way into England. In the 17th century, Isaac Newton would use these to proclaim that he has discovered calculus. And then, because of that, you had new ideas and new technologies coming into England, and all of this together, the new money, the immense amount of money that started coming in from India, the new ideas, the new technologies, new sciences, basically brought about the Industrial Revolution in 17th century England. And you had brilliant minds like Newton and Robert Boyle and Robert Hooke and the other scientists who brought about a revolution in the sciences. And this is what impelled England into becoming a global power. The new technology, the navigation, the focus on the navy, and the sciences that allowed the navy to go very much further than any other navy had gone before. All of this made is what made England into this global power. So it all started with the break that Henry VIII effected with the Vatican Church. Now, how did England become so strong and greedy? I explained how they became so strong. How did they become greedy? Well, they were always greedy. England was always a feudal society, a terrible caste, not caste, but class system. They accuse India of casteism. Good God, have you seen the feudal nature of English society? There was a time in England around 1,000 years ago when more than 10% of the population was slaves. They had to wear this copper or brass rings around their necks. And England has always been a land of a great divide. You have the small aristocracy and nobility, which essentially held all the lands and held all the power, and they decided what would happen, and they decided the fates of the peasants, the people, the poor people. So England was always a greedy nation. They exploited their own people relentlessly, mercilessly for centuries. They were always greedy for expansion. And once they were empowered with the unlimited wealth from India and all this technology and science, then they just expanded outwards. And that's how it all happened. That's how the British Empire was born.